May 19th, 1940. Dover Castle, Kent. 4:12 hours. Fog rolled off the channel like a living thing, thick enough to swallow the headlights of the Bedford staff car as it climbed the steep approach road toward Dover Castle. The sea below was a smear of cold steel, the horizon nothing but a mute gray wall where France lay burning. The air carried the acrid ghost of oil fires drifting across from the continent, and the distant rumble of artillery, faint but unmistakable, echoed through the pre-dawn darkness. Brigadier Claude Nicholson stepped out of the staff car, boots crunching on the gravel. His greatcoat snapped in the wind as he lifted a pair of binoculars toward the channel. Nothing but haze, nothing but waiting. Behind him, a young signals lieutenant jogged up the slope, breath steaming, cap slightly askew. "Sir, Commander Ramsey requests your immediate presence. He says it's urgent." Nicholson lowered the binoculars. "Everything's urgent these days, Lieutenant." But he followed. The two men crossed the stone courtyard of Dover Castle, its medieval towers standing black against the sky. Searchlights swept in slow arcs overhead, piercing the fog with fingers of pale light. Anti-aircraft crews manned their posts, eyes fixed upward, tense and sleepless. They passed through an arched doorway, down a narrow stairwell cut into centuries-old stone, each step colder than the last. The lieutenant spoke only once. "You've not been down into the tunnels yet, have you, sir?" Nicholson shook his head. "Then brace yourself," the lieutenant muttered. "It feels like walking into the underworld." The stairwell ended at a reinforced steel door guarded by two Royal Marines with Sten guns. The senior Marine stepped aside and opened it with a groaning metallic scrape. Warm light spilled out. Nicholson entered. The air changed at once, humid, electric, vibrating with activity. The tunnels under Dover Castle were alive. They stretched forward like the arteries of a buried giant. Whitewashed walls, low ceilings, cables snaking overhead, damp stone sweating beneath layers of fresh paint. Typewriters clacked, teleprinters chattered. The scent of oil lamps, cigarette smoke, and damp chalk filled the corridors. And at the center of it all, Commander Sir Bertram Home Ramsay, naval officer, quiet tactician, and the man about to attempt the impossible. He stood at a map table, sleeves rolled up, gray hair disheveled, eyes red from days without rest. Officers crowded around him. RAF liaisons, naval plotters, engineers, meteorologists. Voices rising and falling in hurried urgency. Nicholson approached. Ramsay looked up. "Claude, good. You're here." Nicholson saluted. "I came as soon as I received your message. What's the situation?" Ramsay exhaled sharply. "Dire." He turned to the map. France was a ruin. German arrows, thick black lines marked in grease pencil, cut across Belgium and northern France like knives. The British Expeditionary Force was trapped, pressed against the sea near Dunkirk. Reports from the continent had grown worse every hour. Collapsing lines, destroyed bridges, French units scattering, Luftwaffe dominance choking every road. Nicholson stared at the board. How many men can still escape? Ramsay tapped his pencil anxiously against the map. If we act now, perhaps 200,000. If we wait another day, far fewer. A heavy silence settled over the room. From deeper inside the tunnels came the thump of generators and the low rumble of ventilation fans. Steady, mechanical heartbeats, pumping life through the underground fortress. Signals officers shouted new updates as telephone lines from Belgium crackled with static-laced panic. Nicholson had fought in the Great War. He had seen chaos. But what he saw on the plotting board now was something different. Not collapse. Extermination. He leaned closer to Ramsay. "What's the Prime Minister's view?" Ramsay's expression hardened. Churchill expects us to hold." He paused. "But he also expects a miracle. One we must build here, in these tunnels." Nicholson frowned. "And what exactly do you intend to build?" Ramsey's voice dropped so low only those closest could hear. "Operation Dynamo." The word hung in the stale air. Nicholson whispered, "Evacuation?" Ramsey nodded once. "The largest attempted in the history of the British Empire." A staff sergeant hurried over with a fresh communiqué. Ramsey scanned it, jaw tightening. "The beaches at Dunkirk are already filling. The mole is still intact for now. But German armor is pushing faster than anticipated." Nicholson felt his stomach tighten. "And how do you plan to pull off a mass evacuation under fire?" Ramsey raised his eyes. "With every ship we have." He pointed at a list on the table. Destroyers, minesweepers, trawlers, paddle steamers, ferries. Civilian vessels pressed into service. Fishing boats, tugs, yacht tenders. Nicholson stared in disbelief. "You're going to send civilians across the channel? Into a war zone?" "If they don't go," Ramsey said quietly, "we lose the entire army." The tunnels vibrated as another teleprinter erupted with frantic clicking. A communications officer tore the message free and handed it to Ramsey. "It's the Admiralty, sir." Ramsey read it. Nicholson watched his face harden. "What now?" Ramsey folded the paper. "London authorizes Dynamo to begin immediately. Naval headquarters will shift to full wartime tempo. All civilian vessels capable of channel crossing must be requisitioned." Nicholson looked around at the cramped, humming tunnels, at the officers racing between charts and radios, at the chalk cliffs pressing overhead like the weight of history itself. And he realized the truth. This hidden labyrinth, carved into the bones of England, was about to become the nerve center of one of the most desperate operations in the modern world. Ramsey snapped to his staff. "Telegraph Dover Harbor. Signal Chatham and Portsmouth. Wake every captain in southern England if you must. We sail tonight." A hush rippled through the tunnel. Nicholson stepped back, absorbing the enormity of it all. "Bertram," he whispered, "if this fails—" Ramsey finished the sentence for him. "Then Britain falls." Behind them, generators growled, teleprinters chattered, and officers scrambled like ants within the underground warren. The tunnels, once forgotten relics beneath Dover's cliffs, now pulsed with purpose, because above them, beyond the fog and the cold Channel wind, Germany was coming, and the only hope of saving Britain's army lay here in the darkness beneath the white cliffs. May 19th, 1940, Dover Tunnels, 5:02 hours. The air in the command center thickened as the first full wave of naval signals went out across southern England. Operators wore headsets slick with sweat, fingers hammering at telegraph keys, the steady tap, 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 like the heartbeat of the nation itself. Somewhere overhead, gulls screamed faintly from the cliffs above. But down here, the world belonged to machinery, wires, and fear. Commander Ramsey stood at the center of the plotting room, surrounded by flickering lamps and the nervous energy of men who knew the country had run out of time. Maps of the channel were pinned across every wall. Inked coastlines, scribbled arrows, estimates, guesses, prayers disguised as coordinates. A naval runner burst through a doorway. "Sir, reports from Dunkirk. German armor halted again on the canal line. Our RAF liaison says the Luftwaffe is shifting focus south." Ramsey snapped his head up. "Any indication why?" "No, sir. But it's slowing their advance by hours." Nicholson muttered under his breath. "Hours aren't enough." Ramsey nodded grimly. "Then we'll turn those hours into lifelines." He motioned to a communications officer. "Put me through to Dover Harbor." The operator bent to his radio set, twisting knobs until static bled into voices. Ramsey lifted the headset, jaw clenched, shoulders tight. "This is Commander Ramsey. All destroyers in harbor are to take on fuel and prepare for immediate deployment. Civilian vessels arriving must be sorted by tonnage and draft. Every boat capable of reaching Dunkirk's beaches is to be readied by nightfall. A pause. Understood. Yes, all of them. Every last one. He lowered the headset and exhaled, rubbing his eyes. Nicholson stepped closer. You're asking them to go into artillery range, into Luftwaffe hunting grounds. I know. You're asking fishermen to sail into hell. Ramsey didn't look up. If they don't, we lose the army that defends this island. The air hummed as the truth settled in. 5:17 hours. The tunnels swelled with urgency as more officers rushed in. RAF controllers with charts of German air routes, intelligence officers clutching decoded Enigma fragments, naval engineers tracking fuel reserves. The tension was thick enough to taste. A thin RAF captain, his uniform rumpled from flying through the night, strode toward Ramsey's table. Sir, Fighter Command reports heavy Luftwaffe activity along the French coast. Heinkel bombers massing at Lille and Calais. Messerschmitt 109 patrols increasing. Nicholson frowned. Are they hitting the beaches? No, sir, the RAF captain replied. They're hunting ships. Ramsey closed his eyes. Of course they were. German reconnaissance had already seen British destroyers making cautious approaches days earlier. The Luftwaffe would be waiting for whatever came next. Nicholson stepped to the large map, scanning the narrow stretch of channel between Dover and Dunkirk, just over 20 miles at its shortest point. Close enough to see France on a clear day. Close enough for hope to feel deceptive. He tapped a finger on the coastline. What do our boys have left for defense? The RAF captain hesitated. Not much. 48 Hurricanes in 11 Group. Another few squadrons farther north. But they're exhausted. Pilots are flying 4, sometimes 5 sorties a day. Nicholson's jaw clenched. So air cover will be thin. Very thin, sir. Nicholson looked away, throat tight. A telephone rang. The shrill, old-fashioned bell echoing through the tunnels. A signals corporal rushed to answer. Dynamo headquarters. Yes, put him through. He handed the receiver to Ramsey. Ramsey pressed the phone to his ear. The voice was unmistakable, powerful even through static. Ramsey, Churchill here. Officers in the room froze, every movement arrested. Prime Minister, Ramsey said, snapping to attention though Churchill could not see it. Dynamo preparations are underway. First destroyers will depart within hours. Good. Churchill's voice was low, urgent. The situation on the continent is collapsing rapidly. You must act with all speed. We are, sir. A long silence. Then Churchill said quietly, The army must come home, Bertram. Whatever ships you can scrape together, send them. Every man you bring back will stand between Hitler and the cliffs above your head. Ramsey swallowed. Yes, Prime Minister. And Ramsey. Yes, sir? History will judge us by what you accomplish in those tunnels. Do what must be done. The line went dead. Ramsey lowered the receiver slowly, hand trembling just enough for Nicholson to notice. He turned to the room, voice steady again. You heard the Prime Minister. This is not simply an evacuation. This is the salvation of the British Army. So listen carefully. The room leaned in. We start tonight. Destroyers first. Minesweepers follow. Civilian craft will move at dawn, under cover of smoke if possible. Signals teams will coordinate routes to avoid U-boat patrols. RAF will give what cover they can. He pointed to the chalkboard. No vessel is to turn back unless sunk. A murmur rippled across the room. Shock, disbelief, fear. But no one argued, because they all understood. The only path left was forward. 5:46 hours. Nicholson walked with Ramsey down a narrow side tunnel lined with pipes and flickering bulbs. The deeper they went, the more the wall seemed to press inward, as if the cliffs themselves were listening. Do you ever wonder Nicholson said quietly. How it came to this. Britain, the Empire, reduced to praying for civilian boats to rescue her army. Ramsey kept walking. I don't pray for the boats, he said. I pray for time. They reached a small lookout slit cut into the cliff face. Ramsey pushed it open, letting salt wind fill the passage. Dover Harbor sprawled below. Destroyers at anchor, cranes lifting crates, fuel lines snaking across the pier. Smoke from the bunkers drifted upward like dark fingers clawing at the sky. Nicholson stared down at the organized chaos. Will it work? He whispered. Can we pull them out? Ramsey didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the men scurrying across the docks. Sailors, engineers, stevedores, civilians answering the Admiralty's call, even teenagers carrying crates. Across Britain, alarms were ringing. Harbors were awakening. Boats were already turning toward Dover. He finally said, "It has to work." Then he turned back into the tunnel. Because if it doesn't, Britain fights alone. Behind them, the wind howled through the slit in the cliff. A cold omen carried from across the channel, where an army waited for rescue. May 26th, 1940. Dover tunnels, 1840 hours. Rain battered the cliffs above Dover, slashing sideways across the channel like a curtain of bayonets. The sea churned violently beneath a wounded sky. Gray, sharp-crested waves rolling against the coast with a warning growl. A storm had risen in the afternoon. One last obstacle thrown across Britain's path. But the boats sailed anyway. Commander Ramsey stood hunched over the plotting table, sleeves rolled to his forearms, face illuminated by the glow of lamps and the erratic flashes of telegraph signals. Sweat ran down his temple, unnoticed. He had barely slept in 4 days. Behind him, the tunnel walls vibrated as generators kicked on, powering radar screens and radio sets in the deeper rooms. Doors opened, and a drenched signals runner stumbled in, panting. Sir, first wave of destroyers reports contact with enemy aircraft off Grave Lines. They're taking evasive action. Nicholson looked up sharply. Casualties? Unclear, sir. But HMS Grafton requests immediate clarification of extraction point. The beaches are chaos. Ramsey nodded without raising his head. Of course they are. Half the French army's been pushed into a corner. He looked at the map. The lines of the German advance were like claws closing around Dunkirk. Armored pincers reaching toward the sea. Nicholson cleared his throat. Should we adjust landing coordinates? No, Ramsey said. We stay the course. Every ship will head to Bray Dunes or the East Mole. Those are the only points offering deep enough draft. Nicholson hesitated. The Mole is barely a pier. It's enough. He didn't say the rest. A pier would decide the fate of a nation. 1852 hours. A young wireless operator lifted a trembling hand. Sir, urgent message from HMS Malcolm. Ramsey turned. Read it. The operator swallowed. Enemy shelling heavy near Dunkirk Harbor. Smoke screens insufficient. The beaches are overflowing with... Static swallowed the rest. Nicholson muttered, God help them. Ramsey leaned on the table, gripping its edges until his knuckles blanched. Patch me through to fighter command. A moment later, a crisp RAF voice crackled through the static. 11 Group, go ahead, Dover. This is Commander Ramsey. My ships are under fire near Dunkirk. Where are your squadrons? A pause. Scrambling 2 Hurricane squadrons now. Weather's worsening. Pilots are exhausted. Ramsey closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. Send them anyway. The voice on the other end hesitated, just long enough to betray the strain felt all across Britain. Yes, sir. The line went dead. Nicholson stared at Ramsey. We're asking boys to fly into a storm with Messerschmitts circling like hawks. Ramsey's reply was barely above a whisper. We're asking everyone to do what shouldn't be possible. 1910 hours, Dover Harbor. While the tunnels hummed with electricity and fear, outside, the harbor writhed with life. Fishermen hauling fuel barrels aboard trawlers. Factory workers pushing carts of rope, nets, and makeshift life preservers. Sailors in oilskins racing down the piers, the thunder of destroyer engines warming up. A small, soot-stained tugboat, Wessex Lass, nudged away from the pier. At her bow, a middle-aged fisherman lit a cigarette with shaking hands. His teenage son stood beside him, rain plastering hair to his forehead. "Dad," the boy asked, voice a fragile whisper, "are we really going to France?" His father looked out across the roiling sea. "Aye," he said simply. "Someone has to." The tugboat disappeared into the mist. In the tunnels, Ramsey received the report minutes later. "Civilian vessels departing, sir." He allowed himself a single nod. "All of them?" "Yes, sir. Every last one." 1925 hours, Dover tunnels. The air grew warmer as bodies crowded into the command center. New officers arriving from London, coastal commanders checking updates, clerks hauling crates of batteries and spare bulbs. Someone in the back spilled tea, and its scent briefly floated through the stale air. A small reminder of life beyond the cliff. A radar technician called out sharply, "Large formation inbound, likely Stukas, vectoring toward Dunkirk beaches." Nicholson stiffened. "Ramsey, if they hit the beaches now, if the men panic—" "They won't," Ramsey said. "They can't afford to." He reached for the phone again. 11 Group. We need those hurricanes over Dunkirk, not the channel. Clear me a corridor. Static. Then, "We're engaging now! Angel 7 to 12! Nicholson whispered. "Godspeed, boys." 1932 hours. A telegrapher suddenly gasped, hunched over his set. "Sir, message from Dynamo ships." Ramsey turned quickly. "Read it." The telegrapher swallowed. "Thousands on beach. Fires everywhere. Under constant dive bombing. Mole still standing. Beginning embarkation." Nicholson exhaled in disbelief. "They're boarding? Under this?" Ramsey nodded once. "Our men aren't waiting for safety. They're waiting for ships." He marked the mole on the map with a thick charcoal pencil, scratching the point so hard the paper tore slightly. Outside, thunder rolled across the channel, masking the distant rumble of war. 1945 hours. A new officer stumbled in. Lieutenant John McAllister, uniform soaked, eyes wide. "Commander Ramsey, I've just come from Ramsgate. Dozens of pleasure yachts are arriving, some barely seaworthy." Nicholson raised a brow. "Pleasure yachts?" McAllister nodded, breathless. "Weekend sailors, sir. Teachers, bank clerks, 2 retired engineers. They heard the call on the wireless. They're insisting on joining the evacuation." Ramsey froze as the words sank in. Civilian courage, this strange, stubborn British instinct, was rising like a tide. He whispered, Tell them every man they save is a soldier who will defend this island." McAllister nodded and dashed back into the tunnels. Nicholson turned to Ramsey. "Still think this was just about time?" Ramsey didn't answer, but the light in his eyes had changed, because now Britain itself was crossing the channel. 20:02 hours, the storm worsened. Rain lashed the entrance to the tunnels. Lightning flashed across the sea, illuminating waves that looked tall enough to swallow boats whole. And yet, more vessels departed. Motor launches, steamboats, fishing smacks, trawlers, private cutters. Old passenger ferries pressed back into service. One by one, they vanished into the dark smudged horizon. Toward Dunkirk, toward fire, toward the edge of an empire's survival. Back in the tunnels, Ramsey stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back as he watched the lights on the command boards flicker. Nicholson approached softly. "You should rest." Ramsey didn't move. Not while they're out there. He stared at the flickering status markers. 100,000 men. 200,000. Maybe more. All trapped on that coast. And we'll get them home, Nicholson said. Whatever it takes. Ramsey didn't look away from the board. We've only just begun. Outside, lightning cracked across the channel, revealing the silhouettes of dozens of small boats battling the storm. The rescue had begun. The miracle had not. Not yet. May 27th, 1940. 3:18 hours. Dover tunnels. The tunnels were dim and throbbing with tension. Every generator hum, every telegraph tick, every footstep echoing through chalk-lined corridors with the weight of a nation's fear. Dawn had not yet broken. And in the underworld beneath Dover Castle, men worked with the heavy-eyed focus of the sleep-starved. Commander Ramsey stood over the situation table again, hair disheveled, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. He had not left the map room in nearly 20 hours. A young RAF liaison officer approached quietly, trying not to show the tremor in his voice. Sir, Fighter Command reports heavy action over Dunkirk. Hurricanes engaged multiple German squadrons overnight. We've lost several. He hesitated, then added, pilots say they fought mostly blind. Cloud cover, tracer fire, smoke. Ramsey forced himself to nod. Tell 11 Group that every minute they buy us is another 1,000 men on boats. The officer saluted and hurried out. Nicholson leaned over the table, tracing the coastline with his fingers. If the Luftwaffe intensifies sorties at first light, the mole won't survive another hour. Then we take advantage of every minute before dawn, Ramsey said. He turned to the signals desk. What's the situation on the beaches? A telegrapher read from the latest report. Sir, lines outside Dunkirk stretch nearly 2 miles. Men standing shoulder to shoulder in the surf, waiting for boats. Fires burning across the dunes. Enemy shelling continues intermittently. The words crackled with cold formality. But Ramsey could see the truth behind them. That beach was hell. 4:01 hours, Dunkirk Beach. A thin fog drifted across the sand, turning rifle barrels and shattered trucks into ghostly silhouettes. Thousands of British soldiers huddled in long columns that wound between dunes, trenches, and patches of burning wreckage. Private James Cutter stood ankle-deep in seawater, clutching his rifle as waves washed over his boots. The sky was gunmetal gray. The air stank of smoke, diesel, and death. He turned to the man beside him, Corporal Davis. Do you think they'll come for us, Corp? Davis squinted toward the dark horizon. They'd bloody well better. Somewhere down the line, an officer shouted, Keep the columns tight. When your turn comes, move quick, no hesitation. Figures emerged through the mist. Men from the Royal Navy directing soldiers toward a battered destroyer anchored just offshore. Small rowboats ferried troops from the beach to the ship in endless cycles. A shell exploded near the dunes, sending a shockwave of sand and smoke rolling across the line. Men hit the ground instinctively. Davis pulled Cutter down with him. Get used to it, he grunted. They'll lob shells all day. Cutter swallowed hard, staring at the surf. It wasn't just cold. It felt alive, pulling at him, reminding him how easily a man could disappear. Above them, the drone of aircraft rumbled in the distance. Every soldier tensed. Stukas, someone whispered. No, another replied, voice trembling. Not yet. Too early. But everyone knew daylight would bring them. 4:20 hours. Dover tunnels. The lights flickered as another generator overloaded, and a group of engineers rushed out, shouting for tools. Someone in a far corridor dropped a crate, and the clatter echoed through the chalk walls like a gunshot. Nicholson checked his watch. We've had boats out there for almost 10 hours. Ramsey didn't look up. And they'll stay there until the last man is off that beach. A telegraph operator suddenly stiffened. Sir, message from HMS Wakeful. Ramsey turned sharply. Read. The operator's face drained of color. Wakeful reports heavy bombing near the mole. They're picking up survivors from another ship sunk just offshore. Enemy dive bombers returning for a second run. Ramsey gripped the edge of the table. Signal all escort destroyers to reposition around the mole. Guns ready. Wakeful is to hold as long as possible. Nicholson exhaled, rubbing his temples. They're sitting ducks out there. Everyone is, Ramsey replied. 4:48 hours. Dunkirk Harbor, the mole. Captain William Tennant, naval officer in charge of evacuation on the ground, stood on the narrow wooden walkway of the mole, rain pelting his oilskin. The waves crashed against the pier's wooden pilings, sending spray up onto the boards as exhausted troops shuffled forward. He pointed to the next destroyer, HMS Worcester, struggling to maintain position. Next column, move! Keep them in line. Soldiers rushed across the mole, boots hammering the planks in rhythmic desperation. Some stumbled. Others carried wounded men between them. Tennant grabbed a young private as he nearly toppled over the railing. Steady, lad. Yes, sir, the boy stammered. From the east, the first faint glow of sunrise began to creep across the sky, revealing thick columns of black smoke and the shattered remains of Dunkirk's port. A distant siren wailed. The Luftwaffe was coming. Tennant shouted orders down the walkway. RF fighters inbound! Brace for Stukas! A chilling whine tore through the air as German dive bombers rolled over into near-vertical dives. Soldiers screamed. Naval gunners fired blindly upward. Bombs fell like iron rain. One exploded near the mole, sending splinters of timber and metal flying. Men were thrown into the water. A section of railing collapsed. Tennant ducked, splinters cutting his face. But when he rose, blood dripping down his cheek, he kept shouting. Get those men aboard! Move! The line surged again, because there was no alternative. 5:12 hours, Dover tunnels. The radio center erupted with overlapping voices. Panic, exhaustion, chaos from the beaches. Destroyer hit! Fire aboard! Mole still intact. Men still boarding. Enemy aircraft everywhere. Nicholson looked at Ramsey, voice hollow. This is madness. Ramsey didn't answer immediately. He stared at the trembling lights, at the quivering telegraph needles, at the maps now blotched with coffee stains and charcoal smudges. Finally, he said, history isn't made by sane decisions. He pointed at the chalkboard tracking rescues. First day totals. An adjutant read from a clipboard. About 7,000 men, sir. Nicholson blinked. 7? Out of 300,000? Ramsey folded his arms. Then tomorrow? We work harder. He turned to the operations staff. Signal every ship still seaworthy. At dawn, they go back. A hush fell over the tunnel. Not fear. Determination. Nicholson stared at him. All of them? Ramsey nodded once. All of them. Because the miracle hadn't happened yet. Not even close. May 28th, 1940. 10:42 hours. Dover tunnels. The tunnels vibrated faintly, like the heartbeat of a giant buried beneath the chalk. More staff had arrived since dawn, stumbling in with coats buttoned wrong, hair uncombed, faces drawn. They hadn't slept. No one had. Commander Ramsey stood at the center of the map room, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the other holding a pencil worn down to a stub. A runner burst in, boots slapping against stone. Sir, another destroyer sunk, HMS Wakeful. Torpedoed on return trip. Heavy casualties. Ramsey closed his eyes. Nicholson swore under his breath. Wakeful? She'd just taken a full load of men. The runner swallowed. A second ship attempting rescue was also hit, sir. Ramsey steadied himself. Signal all destroyers. New orders. No stopping near Dunkirk. Load fast. Depart immediately. No lingering. Another officer called from the communications post. Sir, new reports from the beaches. Lines are growing. Tens of thousands pressing toward the waterline. Any estimate from Tennant? Ramsey asked. The telegraph operator scanned the message strip, eyes widening. Sir, Tennant reports that at this pace, the destroyers alone won't come close to lifting the numbers required. Nicholson muttered. They're trapped rats in a bottle. Ramsey straightened. Not trapped, he said slowly. Not yet. He tapped the map, his finger resting on the narrow blue gap between France and England. The channel is shallow, sheltered by sandbars, impossible for deep-draft ships. His voice drifted. Nicholson looked at him sharply. Unless they aren't deep-draft at all. A heavy silence followed. What are you suggesting? Nicholson asked. Across the room, a signals officer froze, listening. Ramsey exhaled. We need every fishing boat, pleasure craft, tug, barge, anything that floats. Nicholson stared. You want civilian vessels? Ramsey nodded. Yes. Nicholson's eyes darted across the map. Small boats won't survive Luftwaffe attacks. They're unarmed, unarmored. They're shallow enough, Ramsey cut in. They can get right onto the beaches. No need for the mole. No need for transfers from surf to warship. Straight in and straight out. The staff exchanged doubtful glances. Ramsey continued, voice firm. Send the order to the Admiralty. Invoke the Emergency Powers Act. We requisition every small craft from the Thames to Portsmouth. Nicholson whispered. God help them. Ramsey shook his head. God help us if we don't. 11:15 hours. Thames estuary. The scene was surreal. Harbor police raced along the quays, banging on doors of fishermen, tug captains, pleasure boat owners, barge masters. A lieutenant read orders from a clipboard. By command of the Admiralty, your vessel is required for emergency service. Dunkirk evacuation underway. Immediate boarding. A grizzled fisherman with sea-scarred hands squinted at him. You're sending her across the channel? She barely handles a nor'easter. She'll manage, the lieutenant insisted. The fisherman lifted an eyebrow. You ain't seen the swells off Calais. Still, he grabbed his coat. I'll bring her round. Across the harbor, yacht owners, river pilots, barge crews, all were assembling. Some protested. Many stared in disbelief. A few simply nodded, climbed aboard, and began checking engines. A teenage deckhand looked up at his captain. Sir, is this really happening? The captain placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. History's happening, lad. And they need every warm body that can steer. 1410 hours. Dover tunnels. Ramsey paced the length of the map table as new signals came in. Local craft assembling at Sheerness. Tugs leaving Chatham. Pleasure boats preparing in Ramsgate. Civilian volunteers arriving by the dozens. Nicholson scanned a fresh update from the beaches. Germans broke through the perimeter near Furness. More pressure on the eastern flank. Lines crumbling. Ramsey didn't stop pacing. We have a narrow window, he said. Tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning. A runner rushed in. Sir, RAF reports Luftwaffe decreasing attacks for the moment. Weather deteriorating over northern France. Nicholson perked up. Weather's bad? That's good for us. But Ramsey's expression stayed grim. Bad weather is never truly good, just less bad. 1745 hours. Dunkirk beaches. Cutter and Davis lay in a shallow trench dug into the dunes, sand trickling down their helmets as distant explosions shook the shoreline. Smoke curled across the sky, drifting from burning warehouses and shattered fuel tanks. Men nearby whispered anxiously, "Hear the latest. Navy's pulling destroyers back. Too many losses. So what happens to us?" No idea. Cutter squinted toward the horizon. Maybe they'll bring more ships. Davis shook his head. Or maybe this is as far as we go. Before Cutter could reply, a cry went up. Boats! Soldiers scrambled to their feet. Dark shapes appeared far offshore, lines of them. Dozens, then scores. What the hell? Davis breathed. They weren't destroyers. They weren't transports. They were small. Hundreds of them. Fishing boats. Tugs. Cabin cruisers, motor launches, open-decked barges with barely enough free board to stay afloat. "What is this madness?" Cutter whispered. But the boats kept coming. A cheer rose along the beach, first a ripple, then a roar. "They're coming for us! Look at them! Bless those crazy bastards!" Cutter felt tears sting his eyes. Davis slapped his shoulder. "Looks like they didn't forget us after all." 18-20 hours, Dover tunnels. A wireless operator turned toward Ramsey. "First little ships making landing attempts, sir." Ramsey allowed the faintest smile. "Good. Many are having trouble navigating the swells. Some grounding on sandbars. They expected that. Several civilian captains refusing to turn back." Ramsey looked up sharply. "Refusing?" "Yes, sir. They're insisting on making as many trips as needed. Some say they won't leave until every man is off that beach." Ramsey exhaled, quietly, almost reverently. "The bravest fleet we've ever assembled," he said. Nicholson nodded, eyes shining. "And the most ridiculous." Ramsey's smile faded. "But it just might work." Another signal arrived, this time from Tennant. Nicholson read it aloud. "Little ships arriving. Morale sky high. Continuing boarding through night. Holding line." Ramsey placed both hands on the table. "Signal back, continue. We're with you." The telegraph operator typed rapidly, the clicks echoing like distant gunfire. In the tunnels, men straightened. Hope, thin, flickering, but real, was returning. The evacuation had truly begun, and with it, the chance, just the chance, that Britain might survive.